we concluded that it would be better if we, if you like, started the discussion with the full convention today by providing, as best we could, a summary under the broad categories into which all these submissions fit. So that's what we've just had this morning, and I think all the team have done a great job in doing that. But that's, if you like, just one part of the process. Another part is the fact that we've undertaken to have a series of regional meetings. We've had two already, the first one last week in Cork, we've had one this week, past week in Galway, and the rest of the meetings will be next Thursday in Waterford. The following week there will be two in Dublin, one in DCU and one in the Royal Irish Academy. The following week, one in Sligo and one in Athlone, and then the final two meetings are in Monaghan and Limerick. So by the end of November, we will have, if you like, connected with the public in all of these places and listened to what they say. For the record, for the first two meetings that we had in Cork and Galway, they very much reflected the topics that we heard about this morning. And of course, it's fair to say that everybody who's made a submission thinks that their issue is the most important thing that the convention should be considering. So you can get a sense of the task we have ahead of us in terms of, if you like, coming up with maybe a priority list of issues that we might talk about for the two meetings in February. And that's what we're working towards. We'll have the public meetings in the rest of November, and then we'll have to devise a way of voting on what, out of all these issues, might be the priority issues to discuss at our two meetings in February. And we will do that certainly in further connection and further consultation with the steering group. So that's, if you like, where we've got to in the process. And I hope that's as clear as I can make it. And but what we will end up doing, I think, is coming up with some, if you like, priority listing of topics to deal with at the two meetings in February. Now, depending on how many issues we wish to deal with at the two meetings in February, will probably determine the depth into which we can go into those issues. If we have a very small number, we can clearly go into further depth. If we want to broaden it out to a larger number, the treatment of these issues will be more cursory. So that's, if you like, a choice that we're going to have to make. And the other thing to be said, and it was raised, of course, in Suzanne's comments at the end, there is going to be an issue. Our mandate will run out as a convention at the end of March. That's what we've sought. We sought an extension to the end of March, and my understanding is we're getting that, even though we haven't been formally notified of it yet. But a decision at that point will, when our mandate is completed, it will have to go back to government and see, does the government wish to have a further convention? And if it does, would it be in the same shape and composition? And if it does, what agenda of issues will be required to deal with? I mean, this current agenda that we were given was the subject of a resolution of the Oireachtas. It involved, I think, reasonably adequate and good level of discussion between government parties and opposition parties, and the end product of that discussion was the resolution of the Oireachtas, and we've been working over the past 9 months to deliver on that resolution of the Oireachtas, and we're nearly there in terms of delivery. So that's, if you like, a summary of where we've got to, and if you like, it tries to put this morning's very good summaries into context. Anyone like to comment on? I know Peter is coming next, and we will move on to Peter, but is there any just comment on that, if you like, procedural issues? If they're not, I would like to move on to Peter. Okay. Could I again put a further little piece of context here? Because, you know, we were given a mandate, but we need to be aware of the broader history of thinking about constitutional reform. You know, when the Constitution was passed in 1937, for a couple of decades, not much happened in terms of, I mean, the Constitution was there and it was being implemented. And it was probably it was only in the 60s, the 1960s, where the people began to say there are aspects of the Constitution that need re-looking at. And they came about under the influence of, if you like, the economic and social change that was happening in the 1960s, because we were beginning to think about joining the EEC at the time, and also because of the situation in Northern Ireland. They were the three big factors that caused the beginnings of an acknowledgement that the Constitution needed to be changed in certain aspects. So there was a committee in the late 1960s chaired by George Colley which came up with a number of recommendations for change, one of which was actually implemented through the referendum in 1972 to get rid of the provision about the special position of the Catholic Church. The next major look at the Constitution was the Constitution Review Committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Ken Whitaker, which reported in 1996. And that, if you like, went right through the Constitution and made a whole series of recommendations. And subsequently, there was a series of all-party parliamentary committees which examined aspects of the Constitution. Now, what Peter has done is go through these various examinations of the Constitution and pull together, if you like, what recommendations there are, and it's included in your pack, and it's a very detailed piece of work, and I really want to thank him for the painstaking work that he has done as this. Peter is a practicing barrister, and no doubt deserves great commendation, and I hope he's going to get great value and recognition for this work that he's done for the Constitutional Convention. But now we're going to hear from Peter the summary of what he has found.
Good morning. As Art and Leah asked me just to pull together the previous recommendations as regards constitutional reform, as Art has just said, there were previous recommendations. Some of those I've excluded and some of those I've included. What I've excluded are, I think, a report from 1967, the Oireachtas Committee report, a further report the next year, in 1968, from the Attorney General. I think there are several reports from the early 1970s to the mid-1990s regarding the North, which have also excluded. But in the document, chief amongst them is the Constitutional Review Group recommendations from 1996. That produced a very comprehensive report and indeed scrutinised most, if not all, of the constitutional provisions and made recommendations. And after that, the issues were also scrutinised by, I think, 10 different all-party committees, which produced what they call progress reports. The progress reports were produced between, I think, 1997 and the final one, the 10th one, was published in 2006. And they dealt with, I think the first one was general constitutional governance. After that, Senate, the Senate. The third one dealt with the President and the Presidency. After that was the courts. The fifth progress report dealt with abortion. After that was referendum, the Parliament, the government, private property, and the final one dealt with the family. Some of the progress reports simply echoed and endorsed the recommendations made by the Constitutional Review Group from 1996, and some of those went their own way and made their own recommendations. Some of those reports were quite silent. I know the one on abortion, for example, it doesn't really come to any conclusive recommendations, no doubt given the sensitivity of the topic. It's interesting to note that I suppose one could get a bit disheartened in terms of if one looks at the document, there's not a huge amount of recommendations have actually been taken up. For example, I think the 17th referendum dealt with privilege. That was a recommendation from the Constitutional Review Group in 1996, as was a recommendation regarding the abolition of capital punishment. I think that was taken up in the 21st amendment. And a constitutional provision dealing with local government was provided for in the 20th amendment. But I suppose it's easy to say one could get disheartened with that, but I thought it was interesting to note during the debate on the Senate recently, the Constitutional Review Group from 1996 expressly didn't deal with the Senate, and their recommendation was that's such a complex matter, it should perhaps be dealt with in its own and given especially a lot of time. I thought it was interesting to see that even though many of the recommendations haven't been taken up, it was quite curious to note that how much significance and importance was attached during the Senate referendum, that this matter hasn't actually been scrutinised and addressed by the public, and that was, like I said, great significance was attached to that. I think the document, which, at the risk of fudging it, it does speak for itself. It's not the kind of thing one would read in one go, but hopefully it's of some use to see what recommendations were made previously, and I've endeavoured to make it in sequential order, so one can kind of dip in and dip out of it, and at a glance see what previous recommendations have been made and which ones have been taken up. Some have been taken up simply by way of statute. I referred earlier to the 3 or 4 provisions which are taken forward and incorporated in the actual constitution itself. The ones which I suppose made just by way of legislation and not by actual constitutional implementation, where I suppose off the top of my head, I think there's a recommendation for the Ombudsman. We have legislation for the Ombudsman's office currently, but no constitutional provision. And other ones I think related to, I think there's provision there which were also dealt with by the 2003 European Convention on Human Rights Act, also made lots of recommendations, I suppose, moot or somewhat redundant because they dealt with them by way of legislation rather than by way of actual constitutional change. So I think hopefully it is some use, and it can be gleaned some assistance from it. Thank you.
So, both in the presentations we've given you today and in the document that you're going away with, particularly Peter's document, it's providing you with the material to think about and to help you make a decision when you're obliged to make a decision as to the priority issues you want to deal with in the final 2 meetings in February. So that's basically the purpose. That's why we've been doing what we've been doing for the last hour. Okay, we're at the point now of distributing the ballot papers. The ballot papers, we break for coffee, and in the course of that break, would you mind please voting? And the ballot boxes will be up here, and we resume at 11:30 with a roundtable discussion so that you can have an initial conversation on what we've been discussing this morning. Thank you.